welcome to episode 2 in my series How to Play the Kantele. In episode 1, I strongly urged you to adopt the fingering collected from Juhani Kiskinen of Finland, where you just alternate your fingers like this. So let's pick it right up from there. We're in the key of D, so to play a D chord, all you have to do is lift up your right hand, drop your left pinky finger onto the B string, the scale degree 6, and now you just strum the chord with your right hand. So that's what's so important about this fingering. It's the only fingering where there's a direct bridge between melody playing and chord playing, so you can do both at once. So in my opinion, if you adopt this fingering, your playing will improve quickly and efficiently. So now let's take a closer look at the chord. Chords are constructed by stacking thirds, and on a diatonic instrument, all that means is you just play the root, and then you skip a string, play the third, and then you skip a string again and play the fifth. And then those three notes make a triad. Of course, you can pluck the individual notes of the chord, like this, but if you're going to strum the kantele, you need to mute the notes that are outside of the chord and strum the inside chord notes that are left to ring. Now, you want to play all of the chords in the key. So the notes of the key are numbered 1 to 7, and you want to use each of those notes as a root to play a triad. So, to visualize what this means, you start by playing a D chord, the 1 chord, and then you just move your hand up to the 2 chord, move your hand up again to the 3 chord, the F sharp, but then of course you've just run out of strings, so what we want to do instead is play chord inversions. So when you run out of notes at the top, you take the top note of the chord and put it onto the bottom, so you have what's called a chord voicing. So notice the position of your left hand. Just like when you're playing the guitar, you're going to have different chord shapes, and in this case, your ring finger and your pinky finger are next to each other, and all of the rest of your fingers are separated by a string. And so you want to really get into the habit of being able to identify the root of the chord, and it's always going to be, in the case of these triads, the string just above the 2 fingers that are next to each other. So let's derive all of the chords in the key of D. What we're going to do is we're going to use voicings that just move our hand up and down one string, and then the root is just, again, going to be whichever note is just above the 2 strings that are close together. So we start with the 1 chord. Now we use, again, the finger that is the upper finger that is next to another finger, and we use that as a pivot to then move the remaining fingers down so that now the root is your E string, and you play an E minor chord. And then, of course, to get to the chord number 3, F sharp minor, you just move your hands up again to the original position. But of course now your root is the F sharp, and you strum that. So now we move on to the 4 chord. Again, you use the middle finger, which is the upper of the 2 fingers that are now close together, as the pivot, and you move your remaining 4 fingers down to your G chord. And now you can see why I chose to move the 2 chord down instead of, in this derivation, moving up to get to the 2 chord, because now we have the 4 chord and the 5 chord are just played by moving your hand back and forth between the 2. To get from the 5 chord to the 6 chord, you use your index finger as your pivot and remove your remaining 4 fingers down. And now here's where you have a choice again. You can either move your whole hand up for the 7 chord, or from the 6 chord, I prefer to just move the remaining 3 fingers down to play the 7 chord, and then it is then that you move the rest of your hand back up to the return to the 1 chord. Now, of course, you're not really going to play the C sharp diminished chord very much in folk music, but it's good to kind of complete the pattern. The whole exercise from 1 to 7 looks like this. So that's how you derive all of the chords in the key, but of course, what if you want to play a chord progression that goes from the 1 chord to the 3 chord? Well, you'll notice that when you played from the 1 chord to the 2 chord to the 3 chord, what happened was the fingers that were close together have just shifted up 1. So now, to get from the 1 chord to the 3 chord, you want to just move your ring finger up from the C sharp to the D. And similarly, to get from the 3 chord to the 5 chord, you move your middle finger up. But more commonly, you'll probably want to get from the 1 chord to the 4 chord or the 1 chord to the 5 chord. So to get from the 1 chord to the 5 chord, you'll move the 2 fingers up from 1 to 5. And if you're back at the 1 chord, you can use those 2 fingers as your pivots to move your remaining fingers down. So 1, 4. And then, of course, the chord progression 1, 4, 5. And move these 2 fingers back down to 1. Here's where the Kantele gets very interesting, because you can play melody within the region where you're playing the chords. So to do this, you strum the chord, and now you already have your left hand muting the outside notes, and you can just pluck them then with your left hand, like this. And it doesn't take very long before you get fast at playing chords and melody outside notes quickly. Obviously more quickly than that. So let's get back to the 1, 4, 5 chord progression. When you're playing the 1 chord, the 2 fingers that are close together are below your tonic, and so often won't even figure into the melody, and so it won't trip you up very much. But when you play the 4 chord, now you have your middle and index finger close together, so when you're strumming and plucking, you just have to remember when you're playing your melodies that these 2 fingers are close together. One more word about playing safely. When I was in Finland, my Pokola taught me to strum from my elbow. To avoid a lot of strumming from your wrist, you'll get wrist damage that way. So you'll want to check yourself every once in a while to make sure that you're moving your wrist as little as possible when you're strumming. So that covers the basics of Kantele playing. And in future episodes, I really want to dive into improvising interesting melodies, interesting rhythms, interesting soundscapes. And so if you've enjoyed this episode and you would like to help me to make future episodes, please support my Patreon. You'll find a link in the description below. I hope that this episode has helped you conceptualize all of the chords and gets you farther in your playing. So that's all for now.